New York reserves. The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, nearly 30 years ago, I held my son, Cody, for the first time. A couple years later, I held my daughter, Caitlin. I knew right then that these two children were the most important and cherished things in my life. They deserved the happiest childhood and the brightest future and the safest world. I imagine anyone who holds their child for the first time has the same thought. Until you become a parent, it's hard to describe the love you have for your children. Mr. Speaker, that someone would hurt a child simply perplexes me. Children are the most vulnerable, the most innocent in our society. They, most of all, don't deserve the trauma and pain that accompany abuse. They don't deserve to have their trust in adults, their trust in the world shattered at such a young age. And they don't deserve the ghosts of suffering that accompany abuse victims for the rest of their lives. Mr. Speaker, to commit a crime against children is to engage in the greatest of evils. It is to violate our moral order in the most egregious of ways. Our job in Congress is to debate and maintain that moral order. Thankfully, everyone in this chamber can agree on the moral imperative to protect children. So our job today is to uphold our values through well-crafted legislation. We're here today to pass laws that uphold our belief in the inviolability of childhood, in the sanctity of innocence. We're here today for our children. Mr. Speaker, H.R. 1973, the first bill in this rule resolution, strengthens the laws protecting child athletes. The bill requires coaches and adults involved with amateur sports organizations overseen by the U.S. Olympic Committee to report suspected child abuse to local and federal authorities. Unfortunately, reporting isn't always the standard under current law. Over the past 20 years, around 368 individuals affiliated with USA Gymnastics faced sexual abuse by adults affiliated with the organization, according to the Indianapolis Star. Sadly, some of the victims never saw justice. Their allegations remained unresolved, sometimes because coaches moved from state to state to avoid investigation. H.R. 1973 pulls additional adults into the mandatory reporting category, ensuring that those adults working with minors under the U.S. Olympic Committee's jurisdiction must report instances of child abuse to local and federal authorities. It further clarifies the sexual abuse reporting duties of national governing bodies, or NGBs. These organizations, supervised by the U.S. Olympic Committee, manage amateur athletic competitions. We need to promote a culture of reporting sexual assault among youth athletics. That culture needs to overflow into all parts of our society. We're not suggesting we toss out due process for the accused. The legislation at hand only requires the reporting and investigation of sexual abuse of children. Additionally, H.R. 1973 makes stronger the civil remedies that victims of sexual abuse may pursue. Mr. Speaker, the other legislation under this rule, H.R. 1761, goes after those who create child pornography. Just to utter those words is unbearable, but our job in Congress is to stop the unbearable. Under current law, and due to the impact of the court ruling in United States v. Palomino Coronado, perpetrators of child pornography can sometimes evade prosecution for child pornography under a loophole. Under the precedent set in the case, even if perpetrators memorialize the sexual abuse of a child through images and video, they do not necessarily possess the intent or purpose to sexually abuse children in a picture. In other words, they didn't intend to violate Title 18 of the U.S. Code, Section 2251, which prohibits child pornography. We need to close this loophole. If evildoers are sexually abusing our children and photographing or filming it, they should be going to prison for a long time. This loophole was carved out by the judicial branch. It's time for the legislative branch to step in and tighten the statutory language to prevent the exploitation of this loophole and to prevent the exploitation of our children. The bills under consideration today serve two purposes. First and foremost, they provide a deterrent to criminals who would consider harming a child. We can't preemptively stop everyone who plans to commit a crime against a child, which is why we must deter them with the threat of discovery, conviction, and jail time. These bills very practically make the exploitation of a child harder to get away with. They commission more well-meaning adults to be on guard against the occurrence of sexual abuse. They allow victims to pursue even stronger civil penalties that will hopefully deter future criminals. And they strengthen the law itself to ensure that child pornographers face prosecution and appropriate punishment for their heinous crimes. The second purpose achieved today is to send a message. These bills signal to all of America that our society is serious about protecting children, that we're serious about catching child predators. H.R. 1973 specifically directs coaches and others to report sexual abuse. But these bills send a broader message that everyone in this nation should join the fight against child exploitation. We have too many examples of well-meaning adults remaining silent in the face of child abuse. This legislation is meant to push Americans to do what's right, even if it's not easy. We are all the guardians of our nation's youth. We are all responsible for their childhood. We are all proponents of their future. These are our children, our pride and joy. We must offer them the same vigilance and protection we offer our own children. The rule before us gives this House a chance to do just that. I urge my colleagues to support this important rule and the underlying legislation. I reserve the balance.